I invite you to listen to my new dramatic story about military honor, betrayal, and righteous retribution on the Purple Heart Stories channel. I'm confident it won't disappoint you. And please support with a like and subscription if you enjoy it. Chapter 1: The Diary. My name is Ryan Connor. I'm 38 years old, and just a week ago I was simply a former Special Forces captain trying to live a normal civilian life with my wife Olivia, a 34-year-old literature teacher. Now, looking at the tattered diary lying in front of me, I'm trying to comprehend how ordinary morning mail transformed my life into hell, and the woman with whom I shared a bed for 3 years into a complete stranger, capable of things that make even a battle-hardened Special Forces soldier's blood run cold. Sometimes the most dangerous creatures hide not in the thickets of Afghanistan, but behind the walls of your own home. Running is the best way to clear your head. Even the civilian version of my life requires this daily discipline. 5 kilometers around the perimeter of the neighborhood, the same route, the same speed. The predictability I carefully constructed after leaving the army. Returning home with an empty head and pleasantly humming muscles, I noticed the corner of a thick brown package sticking out of the mailbox. Strange. In our neighborhood, mail is delivered after noon, and it was only 7:30 in the morning. I slowed down, automatically scanning the street. My neighbors, the Johnsons, were walking their Cocker Spaniel. Elderly Mr. Wallace was watering his lawn. 3 children on bicycles were heading toward school. An empty white van with a catering company logo was parked 50 meters away. Hadn't noticed it before. A young mailman with headphones stood 2 houses down, sorting letters. Nothing suspicious, but intuition, that same instinct that had saved my life in 30 operations, was now quietly whimpering somewhere at the back of my head. I stopped, not approaching the mailbox. I took out my smartphone and took several pictures of the package from different angles. No identifying marks except my name and address printed on a standard printer. No stamps, no postmarks, so delivered personally. I grabbed the package with 2 fingers, feeling the contents through the thick paper. Something hard, rectangular. A book. Weighs about 500 grams. No unnatural thickening, no wires. The thin packaging wouldn't hide a detonator. At home, I pulled on latex gloves from the first aid kit, an old habit from working with evidence. A thin knife carefully opened the flap. Inside was indeed a book, an old, worn diary in a leather cover without a title. I flipped through it, holding it in the air, about 200 pages handwritten. Placing the diary on the kitchen table, I opened the first page. What I saw made me forget to breathe. Calligraphic handwriting described in frightening detail the murder of a young woman in a hotel room. Not fiction, a technical report. Suffocation with a pillow, time of resistance, residual reflexes of the dying organism, arterial pressure. Everything was described with the precision of an army field manual, but with literary digressions conveying the victim's emotions. It was beautiful and disgusting in its beauty. Flipping through several more pages, I realized I was holding a chronicle of 6 consecutive murders, described with anatomical precision and poetic sophistication. The dates in the upper corners of the pages indicated the last 3 months. But the real shock awaited me further. On the margins of the diary, numerous notes were made in neat feminine handwriting. Technical clarifications, professional comments, suggestions for improving methods. Knife not as effective. Better to use acid. Too much blood for a confined space. I might not have recognized the handwriting. Should not have recognized it. But when you review your wife's handwritten lesson plans every week, sign greeting cards together with her, read her notes on the refrigerator, you unmistakably identify every curve of her handwriting. It was Olivia's handwriting. My wife, who teaches American literature at Westfield High School. The woman who experienced hysteria when I accidentally ran over a frog in the driveway. The person with whom I was planning to have children. Shock paralyzed me for several seconds. Then the operative's instinct kicked in: don't jump to conclusions. I took out an old greeting card signed by Olivia last year from the drawer, compared each letter, the angle of inclination, the characteristic flourish above the Y in the name Ryan. No doubts remained. This wasn't just her hand. It was her professional handwriting, clear, calligraphic, developed over years of teaching, not the usual everyday scribble. She made these notes attentively, thoughtfully. These weren't random scrawls. I poured myself whiskey. At 9 in the morning. One gulp. And then I did what a special forces soldier does in a situation of uncertainty. I started gathering information. The next 2 hours I photographed page after page, especially carefully documenting the comments in the margins. Then I thoroughly examined the binding for fingerprints, fibers, or other traces. Nothing. I hid the diary in a hiding place under a floorboard in the garage, one of 3 secret hiding places in our house that even Olivia didn't know about. An old operative never gives up professional paranoia, even in family life. Especially in family life. I didn't wait for Olivia to return from work. Instead, I called Harris, my former comrade, now working in criminal police. Set up a meeting in a bar where music plays too loudly for anyone to eavesdrop on us. Ryan freaking Connor, Harris squeezed my hand firmly. Long time no see. A year and a half, Danny. I sipped my beer, though alcohol was the last thing I needed right now. How's your research on serial killings going? Stalled, he grumbled. Stupid idea. How about you? Wife still too good for such a gloomy jerk. I didn't share my suspicions with Harris completely. Said I was conducting a personal investigation for an acquainted writer working on a detective novel. I needed information about recent unsolved murders in the city and surrounding areas. You know, Harris drawled, looking at me with a narrowed eye, I could say this is against protocol, but what the hell, who cares? We've had a real headache these last 3 months. A series of strange murders. Different methods, different victims, no connection except the strange, poetic execution. As if the killer is experimenting with different styles. My heart skipped a beat. How many victims? 6 confirmed. Maybe more. He lowered his voice. We're not spreading this around, but many details are too specific. This is a loner or a group with special knowledge of anatomy, someone with medical education. Or someone married to a teacher who spent her youth in an anatomical theater with her pathologist grandfather. I thought. Olivia often talked about how her grandfather instilled in her a love for science. But I didn't say this out loud. Instead, I asked Harris to send me the main dates and details of the crimes. He agreed, but on one condition: no discussion with anyone. I gave my word. In the evening, after Olivia fell asleep, I created a table on a secured laptop. In the left column, dates and details from the diary. In the right, information from Harris. 5 out of 6 murders matched almost completely. The 6th didn't have an official date of death. The body was found too late. But the methods, locations, all the details pointed to a single source. Then I noticed a pattern that made my stomach clench. The diary didn't just describe murders, it was an evolution. Each subsequent crime included improvements suggested in Olivia's comments in the margins of the previous one. The killer was learning and perfecting. And my wife was his consultant. The next morning I did something I hadn't done since my service days. I started a cover operation, this time directed at my own wife. Called in to work, citing family circumstances. Told Olivia I was going to the neighboring state for a security consultation. Instead, I took up a position in a rented car 100 meters from the school where my wife worked. At 3:30 p.m., Olivia left the building, but instead of the usual route home, she headed in the opposite direction. Urban surveillance was always my strong suit. Even with modest preparation, an ordinary citizen would find it almost impossible to notice a professional conducting observation. Olivia, despite her sharp mind, didn't have the slightest chance. She arrived at the Inkwell Cafe in the Bohemian district of the city. Literary club, photo exhibitions, poetry evenings, a place where local intellectuals gathered. Not the best place for a conspiratorial meeting, too many attentive eyes. I made a mental note. Either Olivia doesn't understand the seriousness of her actions, or this is another level of conspiracy where meetings are conducted in plain sight. After 10 minutes, a young man in his 30s sat down at her table. Long hair gathered in a careless bun, worn leather jacket, intelligent glasses in a thin frame, a typical representative of the creative bohemia. They exchanged greetings like old acquaintances. But there was something in their gestures, in the fleeting touch of hands, that made my stomach clench. I chose a table far enough not to attract attention but within hearing range. Hid my face behind an unfolded newspaper, borrowed a pen from the waitress, and pretended to be solving a crossword puzzle. Classic but effective technique. The structure of the second chapter is weak, Alex. Olivia's voice sounded like in a literature class, professional, with a note of superiority. You're rushing too quickly to the climax. The suffering should build gradually. I thought slow strangulation was too banal. Alex nervously twirled the cup in his hands. Banal because you're describing the process, not the sensations. Listen, Olivia's voice became softer, more intimate. The first 30 seconds, the victim experiences pure panic, adrenaline skyrockets. Then, around the second minute, oxygen deprivation causes euphoria. Consciousness begins to blur, fear recedes. This is the key moment of transit between life and death, understand. Here you need to slow down the narrative, let the reader feel this. Weightlessness on the border of existence. Her words resonated with what could be taken for artistic enthusiasm. But I sat close enough to see the dilated pupils, a slight blush on her neck, the tiniest droplets of sweat on her upper lip, physiological signs of excitement that would not deceive a trained eye. Olivia wasn't just consulting. She was reliving the experience, savoring every detail. "What about the theory of merging with the character?" asked Alex, lowering his voice. "Oh, that's the most difficult part." Olivia leaned closer, and I strained to hear. "A real writer must not just imagine his hero but become him, feel his impulses as his own. Only then does the text become authentic." The master says. The clatter of broken dishes at the next table interrupted her mid-sentence. To my disappointment, after this, they moved on to other, more innocuous literary topics. The surveillance continued for 2 days. Olivia met with Alex daily in different cafes. I recorded all the details of their conversations, but nowhere was there a direct admission of murders, only strange, ambiguous discussions of the creative process and immersion in the material. On the third day, instead of meeting at a cafe, Olivia drove straight to Alex's house, a small bungalow on the outskirts of the city. She spent 2 hours there. When she came out, her face was calm, professional, but I noticed the same unhealthy gleam in her eyes as during the discussion of strangulation. There was only one way to find out the truth. I waited for night. Alex's bungalow stood in a dimly lit alley, the perfect place for infiltration. Neighbors far enough away not to hear the quiet breaking of a lock. Neither of the 2 surveillance cameras on the street monitors the approach to the back entrance. I never thought that skills acquired in dozens of special operations would come in handy for breaking into a civilian's apartment in my own homeland. 5 minutes on the lock. No alarm, typical carelessness of the bohemian crowd. Inside, silence, dim light from a lamp in the living room, the smell of old books and something else. A metallic taste that I couldn't mistake for anything else. Blood. The living room looked like the office of an obsessed researcher. Walls hung with photographs, maps, newspaper clippings. On large cork boards, diagrams with red threads connecting various points. I came closer, examining the photographs. Faces of people, places, clippings from police reports. Victims. All 6 murders were documented in detail, with photographs of crime scenes, maps of victim movements, time diagrams. And all this perfectly corresponded to the descriptions from the diary. In the center of one of the boards, a photograph of Olivia taken by a hidden camera. Around it, arrows pointing to various elements of the investigation. She wasn't an accomplice. She was the central figure in this scheme. But something didn't add up. Why would Olivia allow Alex to document her involvement? This contradicted all principles of conspiracy. Unless... Suddenly I felt that same metallic smell, but stronger. It was coming from the bathroom. A gun slid into my hand as if by itself. I quietly approached the slightly open door and pushed it with the barrel. Alex's body lay in the bathtub. Clothes discarded on the floor, he was killed with surgical precision. One smooth movement that opened the carotid artery. Splatters on the tile wall indicated he was standing when killed. Then the body was carefully placed in the bathtub so everything would drain into the plug hole. Professional work. Too professional for a high school literature teacher. Next to the bathtub, on the closed toilet lid, lay a stack of papers, pressed down by a scalpel wet with blood. I carefully took the top sheet, trying not to leave fingerprints. It was a draft of the next chapter of the diary, written in Alex's handwriting. It described his own murder, with the same anatomical details, with the same poetic sophistication. But the story broke off in the middle. The last sentence remained unfinished. When the blade touched his skin, he felt a strange relief, as if all the previous months were merely a prelude to this final act of literary. Further was a smudged flourish. The pen slipped when the writer felt the knife at his throat. This wasn't just a series of murders. It was a book written in blood, where each new author became the last chapter of the previous narrative. And Olivia was neither victim nor accomplice. She was the chief editor. I returned home 2 hours before dawn, carefully erasing traces of my presence in Alex's bungalow. The parquet board in the bedroom quietly creaked under my weight as I slipped inside. Olivia lay on her side of the bed, breathing measured, deep. I lay down, fully clothed on top of the blanket, closed my eyes but didn't sleep, listened to the night and pondered what other secrets could be hidden by the woman lying 30 centimeters from me. At 3:15, the front door quietly opened and closed. The footsteps were almost silent, much quieter than Olivia usually walked. Coming upstairs, she carefully opened the bedroom door and froze on the threshold, examining the contour of my body on the bed. I imitated deep sleep, but through half-closed eyelids saw her figure in the doorway. She looked as always, my Olivia, with neatly gathered hair in a modest dress. Only the eyes were different, bright, feverishly gleaming in the half-darkness. "Ryan," she whispered, coming closer. I muttered something unintelligible and turned over, pretending to wake up. "Sorry I woke you." Her voice sounded as usual, with a slight hoarseness from fatigue. "It's 3 in the morning." My voice was a perfect imitation of sleepy irritation. At that moment, I noticed what she was trying to hide in the darkness. On the cuff of her white blouse, almost invisible in the half-darkness, splashes of blood. A professional eye could distinguish them even in the dark, a characteristic pattern. Olivia intercepted my gaze and casually tugged at her sleeve. "I'll take a shower, lie down a bit more, and then go work." She stood up and headed to the bathroom. The last chapter turned out to be more difficult than I thought. Through the ajar door, I heard how she turned on the water and began to hum. A melody from West Side Story, light-hearted, almost childish. The way housewives hum while doing everyday chores, not women who just cut someone's throat. When she returned to the bedroom, she smelled of lavender soap and body lotion. Perfectly clean, without a single trace of what had happened. She slipped under the blanket and turned to me, smiling that same smile with which she greeted me every morning for the past 3 years. "I'm so tired but so happy," she whispered, closing her eyes. "Sometimes the right word changes the whole story. You understand." I understand, I replied, looking at the ceiling. And I really did understand. In 16 years in special forces, I had seen many psychopaths, professional killers, terrorists, sadists of all stripes. But I had never met someone who so perfectly concealed their true nature behind a mask of ordinariness. What was even worse, I slept next to such a person for the past 3 years and never once suspected anything amiss. My wife quietly breathed beside me, her face serene in sleep, almost childlike. But before my inner vision stood Alex's body in the bathtub, his unfinished manuscript, and the room hung with evidence of crimes. I didn't know what connected us to these murders, but I was certain of one thing. This was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, beyond the ordinariness of our life, a plan was unfolding, part of which I had yet to discover. I looked at the sleeping Olivia and thought that there are things scarier than death on the battlefield. One of them is realizing that the person you loved never existed. Chapter 2: Literary Experiment. Waking up the next morning, I lay motionless for a long time, listening to Olivia getting ready for work. Familiar sounds, rustle of clothes, quiet clinking of a cup, light tapping of heels on the parquet, now sounded like a false melody, an imperfect imitation of normality. Each of her new phrases seemed to me an illusion, a fragile construction behind which hid a darkness unknown before. After the front door closed behind her, I got up and went to the shower. Standing under the scalding streams, I made a decision that changed everything. I was starting the hunt for my own wife. For surveillance, you need a command post, a place from where you can manage the operation without risk of detection. I thought long before choosing a suitable location. My garage, transformed into a sort of workshop for carpentry. Olivia never went there, respecting my male territory. Her mindset was predictably traditional, another part of a carefully constructed mask. Equipment choice was limited to what could be acquired without leaving digital traces. Unlike official operations, I couldn't turn to staff technicians providing everything needed. Drexel helped, a former communications specialist of our unit who, after retirement, opened a small electronics store in the suburbs. Home surveillance, he grinned when I explained what I needed, eyes narrowed, scanning my face. Think she's cheating on you? Something like that, I replied with a stone face. No questions. He raised his hands in a defensive gesture. But I'll tell you one thing, Connor. Most guys who come for such equipment usually find what they never wanted to see. If he only knew. The system I assembled was compact but effective. 5 micro cameras smaller than a button, wireless, with 10-day autonomous power, with motion sensors to save charge. Miniature microphones of the same class used for listening to diplomatic premises. Software for remote access to her laptop. Installing all this, I felt nauseating déjà vu, exactly the same way we prepared for capturing terrorists in Kandahar. The only difference is that now the target was my own wife. The placement of devices was thought out taking into account Olivia's habits. A camera in the lower corner of the bookshelf in her office gave a full view of the workspace. The second, in the ventilation grate of the bedroom. The third, hidden in the wall clock of the living room. The fourth I installed in the electric socket of the hallway, and the fifth, in the shade of the night lamp on her bedside table. Microphones were distributed similarly, taking into account the acoustics of the rooms. The pre-assembled system allowed quick installation of devices while Olivia was at work. Professional skills didn't fail. 3 hours, and the entire system was perfectly calibrated, tested, and brought into working condition. Not a single element was noticeable without special equipment. The most difficult part, penetrating her laptop. Olivia was careful with passwords. I managed to hack it only because I knew her habit of writing down complex combinations of symbols on the back of bookmarks in books. The bookmark in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights contained the necessary sequence. I installed the spy program in 17 minutes, twice as fast as planned. In the evening when Olivia returned home, the system began to work. I sat in the garage, looking at the laptop screen divided into sectors, observing her every movement around the house. The woman on the screen resembled my wife, the same gestures, the same smile, the same habits. But now I saw behind this perfect imitation what was hidden inside, a predator playing the role of a domestic animal. The first 3 nights nothing happened. Olivia worked on school documents, read, watched a series on her laptop. Nothing suspicious, nothing strange. I almost began to doubt my conclusions. On the fourth night, the regime changed. At 1:28 a.m., Olivia suddenly woke up, as if from a silent alarm, carefully slipped out of bed, making sure I was asleep. Barefoot, went to her office and turned on the laptop, connecting headphones. I activated the remote access program. On my screen appeared a copy of what she saw, a protected website requiring 3-stage authentication. Design minimalistic, without identifying marks, black background, white text, simple forum interface. In the upper left corner, a symbol of an hourglass, an unusual choice for a literary community. Olivia entered a private chat with a user called Pen Master. The history of their correspondence numbered hundreds of messages, much more than I expected. Their communication had lasted at least 6 months, long before the series of murders. "The 7th chapter of Symphony is brilliantly completed," wrote Pen Master. "Reviews from collectors exceeded expectations. They call your work innovative. Ask about the possibility of meeting the author." "The author prefers anonymity," replied Olivia. "How did the auction go?" "Closed at 1.2 million. Collector from Saudi Arabia. The council is impressed with your talent. Your method of preparation for writing creates unparalleled authenticity." My blood froze. These weren't metaphors or literary allusions. They were talking about real murders that were being sold as works of art. "The immersion ritual before writing the 7th chapter went perfectly," continued Olivia. "The man was exactly as I imagined the character, the same tense look, the same restrained power in movements. I absorbed his emotions and then transferred them to paper. It's a pity I had to part with such a wonderful source of inspiration." "This is the main strength of our philosophy," replied Pen Master. "True literature requires not only imagination, but also physical immersion in the material, the merger of the author with the character. Only by experiencing closeness with the one who will then be sacrificed to art can absolute authenticity be achieved. Your style of combining eros and thanatos is truly revolutionary." I looked at these lines and with horror understood their true meaning. Olivia didn't just kill. She first seduced her victims, slept with them, and then took their lives. And all this in the name of a literary experiment. Continuing to read the correspondence, I discovered that Olivia sought her victims through a dating app, where she maintained a profile under the name Elena. Carefully selected men corresponding to character images for her book. Then came seduction, intimate closeness as immersion into the character, and finally murder, subsequently described with frightening poetic quality and anatomical precision. Then the conversation took a new turn. "The final chapter requires a special character," wrote Pen Master. "The cycle must close. We've found the perfect candidate, connected to the beginning of the story." "You chose him because of the connection with me?" asked Olivia. "Because of the connection with both of you. Poetic symmetry. He doesn't suspect his role in our project." A file was attached to the message. When Olivia opened it, a photograph of a middle-aged man with a military haircut and eyes I immediately recognized appeared on the screen. Marcus Devereux, sergeant of my former unit. The man who saved my life in Kandahar and became a military journalist after discharge. "His past makes him ideal for the final chapter of Symphony," continued Pen Master. "Tomorrow he arrives in the city. It's necessary to establish contact through the usual protocol. The immersion ritual should be especially deep, given the significance of this chapter." "I understand," replied Olivia. "I'll take care of it." After 2 nights of studying Olivia's correspondence with Pen Master and other forum members, I finally understood the structure of the organization they called literary experimenters. This wasn't just a community of psychopaths united by a thirst for killing. This was a well-organized, hierarchical cult combining literary ambitions with the darkest impulses of human nature. At the center of the structure stood the board of directors, anonymous patrons financing the project. A step below, curators like Pen Master, selecting and guiding authors like Olivia. But the most shocking element was the ritual of immersion into the character. According to the club's philosophy, true art requires not only describing experience, but also physically embodying the text in reality. Before each murder, the author must enter into an intimate relationship with the victim, absorbing their essence for subsequent transfer to paper. For this, dating apps were used, where people with certain appearances and characteristics were sought. Olivia maintained a separate profile under the name Eleanor, presenting herself as a widow seeking comfort after losing her military husband. This legend attracted a certain type of men, protectors, often with military backgrounds. Such were required by the plot of her literary project. Each book had its theme. The current project was called Symphony of Solitude, and apparently was dedicated to military personnel and the consequences of combat on the psyche. No wonder the final victim was chosen to be Marcus, a military journalist writing exposé articles about corruption in the army. That evening, Olivia received a new message from Pen Master. The subject has arrived in the city, staying at the Oriental Hotel. Begin the hunt. I watched as she opened the dating app, selected her Eleanor profile, and began searching. Marcus was there, recently registered, indicated his real name and occupation in his profile. An unsuspecting victim voluntarily revealing information about himself to a predator. Olivia sent a like to his profile, then a short message. Military journalist. My late husband served in Afghanistan. I've always respected people who tell the truth about war. The hook was cast, the hunt began. What started as an investigation of murders turned into an immersion into the abyss of human perversion disguising itself as art. And my wife was not just a participant. She was one of the stars of this bloody show. The day after I learned about the plans regarding Marcus, I decided to check Olivia's previous victims. Each murder in the series had its specificity, but now I was looking for a common denominator, the victim profile and traces of the immersion ritual. Using contacts in the police, I gained access to photographs of the last 6 victims. Men of different ages, professions, social statuses. At first glance, nothing in common. But digging deeper into their digital footprint, I discovered a pattern. All were registered on the same dating site. All 6 were looking for women of a certain type, intelligent, lonely, with an interest in literature, the exact profile under which Eleanor fell. Something else also emerged. Each victim was killed exactly 72 hours after the first contact with Eleanor in the app. If this rule persisted, Marcus had no more than 3 days from the moment of their first message. At night, Olivia again sat down at her computer. This time she opened a text document and began writing a plan to seduce Marcus. Clinically accurate, step-by-step plan, where each detail was calibrated like a military operation, from the place of the first meeting to the words she would say, from the type of perfume to the pose in which she would sit. Everything calculated to play on certain psychological triggers. Sick scrupulousness of a maniac. She thoroughly studied his biography, found photographs, studied his habits through social media, knew what coffee he preferred, what books he read, what films he watched. All this was to help her create the illusion of a kindred spirit accidentally met in a bar. The plan ended with a section titled Immersion, where with the same methodicalness were detailed elements of intimate contact, not as an act of passion, but as a surgical procedure necessary for absorbing the essence of the victim before their murder. I read these lines, written by the hand of the woman with whom I lived for 3 years, and didn't recognize a single trait of the one I considered my wife. This was a document composed by a mind completely alien to everything human, cold, calculating, seeing in people only material for its perverted literary experiments. Marcus was destined for the same fate as the previous 6 victims: seduction, intimacy, murder, and all this in the name of creating authentic art. I felt a cold fury growing inside. Not emotional, not impulsive. This was the calculating, focused fury of a sniper marking a target. The next day I began to identify Pen Master, the mysterious curator behind the entire operation. In Olivia's correspondence with him, there was little personal information but small details, phrases, references to specific literary works, peculiarities of punctuation, gave clues for analysis. In addition, in one of the conversations, it was mentioned that Pen Master once rejected Olivia's first book. This significantly narrowed the search circle. In my wife's personal belongings, I found a folder with old manuscripts and rejections from publishers. Among them was a critical review from a famous literary reviewer signing under the pseudonym El Morro. The style of the review was caustic, humiliating. The author not just rejected the manuscript, but methodically destroyed the beginner writer's self-esteem. Your prose demonstrates the characteristic female inability to understand the true depth of human darkness. You glide over the surface of existential despair, afraid to immerse yourself in the genuine abysses. This was the key. I began investigating the identity of El Morro, a mysterious critic who never appeared in public, always wore a mask at literary events under the pretext of protecting the objectivity of judgments. There was little information online, but one archived image caught my attention, a photograph from a literary award 5 years ago. El Morro, in a characteristic Venetian mask, shook hands with the laureate. On the critic's wrist was visible a scar, of a specific form, familiar to every military person. Such scars are left by a thermite grenade. I had seen similar scars on fighters who survived close contact with this weapon. The next 6 hours I spent building connections between various facts: a literary critic with a military past, a person hiding their face, an expert in the field of anatomy and trauma psychology. These topics often figured in his publications. Olivia kept all issues of the Literary Observer magazine where El Morro was published. Looking through these articles in chronological order, I noticed another detail. The critic's style changed sharply about 4 years ago. The language became more technical, detached, with special attention to physiological aspects of suffering. Interesting. Who exactly is hiding behind this mask? Marcus wasn't answering calls. His number constantly went to voicemail, uncharacteristic for a person who always kept their phone at hand. This could mean only one thing: he was already in the city and possibly in danger. I activated an old military communication protocol, an emergency message to a special email with the code word Blizzard. This communication channel we established back in Afghanistan for critical situations. If Marcus checked email, he would understand this wasn't just a meeting of old friends, but a high-level alarm signal. Meanwhile, Olivia acted with frightening efficiency. Studying her activity in the dating app, I discovered she had already established contact with Marcus under her alter ego Elena. Their first meeting was scheduled for tomorrow evening at the Blue Oyster Bar, an establishment for veterans on the city outskirts. The plan of the literary club was simple and cruel. Olivia was to seduce Marcus, enter into an intimate relationship with him as part of the immersion ritual, and then kill him, completing her symphony of solitude. I couldn't allow this, but acting openly was risky. I didn't know how deep the connections of the literary club extended, who else might be involved. At 4:27 p.m. came the response from Marcus Short in military cipher style. Sniper 1, contact confirmed. Meeting at the Stone House, ETA 2200. Stone House, our code for an old hunting cabin in the forest, 7 kilometers from the city, a place known only to former members of our unit. At 9:45 p.m. I was there, having previously made sure no one was following me. Parked the car half a kilometer away, walked the rest of the way through the forest. The perimeter was clear, no signs of unauthorized presence. Marcus appeared exactly at the appointed time. He had changed over these years, grown a short beard, gray appeared at his temples, but the eyes remained the same, attentive, with that special gleam that only people who have seen too much have. "Ryan," he embraced me firmly, but there was wariness in the embrace. Didn't expect to receive a highest-level alert code after so many years. "Marcus," I pointed to the table where I had arranged printouts of my investigation. "We have a problem, a big problem." The next 2 hours I explained the situation to him, from the mysterious diary to the identity of pen master. Marcus listened silently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Damn," he rubbed his eyes when I finished. "I thought my article would cause a stir but didn't expect to become a target for a maniac who turned out to be your wife. And what do you suggest? Go to the police?" "No," I shook my head. "They have too many connections. Even your contact in the FBI could be under their influence. We need to act independently." "Like the good old days," Marcus smiled weakly. "Just the two of us against the system." "No," I looked him in the eyes. "You will be the bait." I outlined my plan. Marcus was to continue communication with Eleanor in the dating app, agree to a meeting, but under no circumstances remain alone with her. We would know all their plans in advance, thanks to my access to Olivia's correspondence. When it comes to the invitation to a literary evening in a country house, we would be ready. I would take a sniper position on a nearby hill, providing cover. Marcus would go with a hidden microphone and weapon. Our goal was not just to prevent a murder, but also to gather evidence against the entire organization. "Too risky," Marcus shook his head. "If she seduced and killed 6 men, we can't underestimate her abilities. And what if the plan assumes she should bring me to the country house already dead? This is precisely why you won't drink anything she offers and will always have an emergency evacuation protocol." I put my hand on his shoulder. "We've been in worse situations. Remember Kandahar? Then we didn't even have a plan." "All right," he nodded after a pause. "But I have one condition. If everything goes not according to plan, you destroy this entire organization, at any cost, even if I'm not around." "I promise." I extended my hand, and we sealed the deal with a military handshake, firm, with a characteristic pressure of the thumb on the wrist, a signal of absolute loyalty to the given word. When Marcus left, I sat in the cabin for a long time, reviewing printouts and planning the operation. For the first time in a long time, I felt a strange relief. Now I had an ally. I was no longer fighting shadows alone. And also, I felt a grim satisfaction that soon I would again be doing what I was created for, finding a threat and neutralizing it. On the way back to the city, I couldn't escape the thought of how ironic the situation was. For 3 years I tried to leave the war in the past, build a normal life. And now war itself had come to my home, wearing the mask of my wife. The final operation, I thought. One more last mission. And this time it wasn't just about following orders. It was about restoring the boundary between truth and lie, reality and illusion, which I had so long considered my life. Chapter 3: The Trap. Planning a perfect murder isn't difficult. It's much harder to plan a perfect trap to stop a killer before they finish the job, especially when the killer is a woman sleeping in your bed, a woman with a face you loved and a soul you never knew. Preparation for Operation Trap began long before dawn, with the first message Marcus sent to Elena from his hotel room. Haven't met a woman in a long time who understands the price of truth about war. Coffee. Concealed carry body armor. Marcus doubtfully examined the tactical equipment laid out on the table in the cabin. Seriously, this is a date in a bar, not a raid in the Mojave Desert. I methodically checked the equipment. And this is not a date. This is the first phase of penetration behind enemy lines. The dim light of the lamp emphasized new wrinkles in the corners of Marcus's eyes. He shook his head. Sorry for asking, but doesn't it hurt? You're talking about your wife as a combat target. I didn't raise my head from the microphone I was calibrating. Feelings, an unaffordable luxury right now. Later, when it's all over, I'll allow myself to feel pain. Maybe. The woman I liked never existed. My voice sounded even, too even. Olivia is a mask. Behind it hides something else, something I never truly knew. Marcus silently nodded, accepting this truth. The next 2 hours we practiced the plan down to the last detail. 3 conditional phases: initial contact in the bar, field observation during the supposed seduction, and the final operation in the country house, the place of the supposed murder. Marcus wore a hidden microphone of the latest generation, the size of a grain of rice, sewn into the lining of his jacket. A transmitter with a 6-hour autonomous power source in a metal belt, indistinguishable from a normal one. A GPS beacon in the heel of his left boot. On his right wrist, stylish watch with a liquid analysis function. It was only necessary to dip the steel clasp of the strap into a drink, and the chemical composition was immediately transmitted to my receiver, revealing the presence of drugs or poisons. Never drink anything you didn't see being prepared, I repeated for the 3rd time. No open bottles, no prepared cocktails. Even if the bartender prepares it in front of you, distract her and discreetly test the drink. I know, Marcus grinned. Not my first undercover operation, Captain. But the first against a woman who killed 6 unsuspecting men. The smile disappeared from his face. How does she do it, Ryan? I mean, technically, she's your wife, not exactly. Fragile, I finished for him. That's your mistake number 1. Olivia regularly practices yoga more for flexibility than strength, but she's strong enough to hold a knife in the carotid artery. Besides, I opened a folder with her medical documents. In college, she studied pathological anatomy for 3 years, was going to become a forensic expert. Her grandfather worked in the morgue, instilled an interest. Only when her father died did she switch to the literature faculty. Career change due to grief. Or liberation from restraining influence, I noted. In her diaries, there are many entries about how her father didn't allow her to fully realize her literary vision. I handed Marcus a tiny injector that looked like a fashionable piercing decoration. What's this? A polyurethane foam capsule with a broad-spectrum antidote and central nervous system stimulant. If you feel numbness, dizziness, or just an intuitive signal of danger, press it to your skin and push hard. Full dose is injected in half a second. 30 seconds later, you'll feel the effect. Like an adrenaline shock. Worse, but better than dying from Spanish fly mixed with fentanyl. That's how the second in her list of victims died. Marcus thoughtfully twirled the injector. With what probability will I come out of this operation alive? 78%, I replied without hesitation. Adjusted for your physical shape, awareness, and support, it's much higher than we had in Kandahar. In Kandahar, we both thought we wouldn't survive, he smiled weakly. 90% probability of death. Remember what you said then. Means we have 10% for immortality, I finished his quote. It was our old joke. Strange that it still brought comfort. On the roof of an office building opposite the Blue Oyster Bar, I set up an observation position 3 hours before the scheduled meeting. Thermal imager, directional microphone with parabolic reflector, digital binoculars with 60 times magnification, standard observation equipment, modified for urban conditions. The temperature on the roof dropped to 4 degrees, but I didn't feel the cold. My body entered the familiar sniper waiting mode. Shallow breathing, minimal movements, all senses focused on the target. I watched the entrance to the bar, analyzing everyone entering and exiting. At 7:42 p.m., the motion sensor installed on Olivia's jacket hidden by me in the wardrobe activated. She left the house. 8 minutes later, her car drove past the bar, circled the block, stopped in the alley behind the building. Classic perimeter check, not at all what you'd expect from a high school literature teacher. Olivia entered the bar through the back door. Gray coat, dark hair gathered in an elegant bun, minimal makeup. She looked as always intelligent, reserved, attractive in her calm confidence. The kind of woman easy to fall in love with. Believe her, trust her. Through the directional microphone, I heard how she exchanged a few words with the bartender, a regular customer well known. She took a table in the corner, with a view of the entrance and the emergency exit behind her back. A military habit I had never noticed in her before. By the wall stood a rack with literary magazines. She took one and began to read, periodically raising her eyes to the entrance door. At 8:00 p.m. exactly, second to second, Marcus crossed the threshold of the bar. I saw him through the window, relaxed posture, free movements, wide smile for the bartender. Perfect imitation of a man who just dropped in for a drink after a long day. No signs of alarm or wariness. He placed an order, took a glass of beer, and only after that, as if by chance, noticed the woman in the corner. Theatrical surprise, nod of recognition, as if remembering her photo from the dating app. He approached her table. "Eleanor," his voice clearly transmitted through the microphone. "I'm Marcus, we were texting." "Of course," she smiled, gesturing for him to sit. "I feel I would have recognized you even without a photo." "Is that so?" "There's a certain confidence in the posture of people who have seen what you've seen." Her voice was exactly the same as I heard it thousands of times at home. Human, natural, back straight but not tense, a gaze that evaluates space, readiness for the unexpected. Marcus laughed. Professional deformation, hard to turn off the soldier inside. "And no need to," she leaned slightly towards him. "It's part of you, who you are." "And who am I?" "A man telling the truth about war." She said it so sincerely that even I had a moment of doubt. Could this all be an act? Maybe Olivia really admires Marcus and his work. For the next hour and a half, I listened as my wife skillfully led the conversation, penetrating, intimate, touching aspects of military experience usually not discussed with civilians. She knew what questions to ask, knew when to remain silent, allowing Marcus to express what he had kept inside for years. I saw her technique. Every 12 to 15 minutes a light touch to Marcus's arm, always at points rich in nerve endings, wrist, back of the hand, bend of the elbow, gradually reducing the distance between them, mirroring his posture. These were all classic NLP techniques that I myself used during prisoner interrogations, but Olivia applied them with such naturalness that they seemed like sincere expressions of sympathy. "Would you like to continue this conversation in a more private place?" she asked after the third glass of wine, which she drank in small sips. "I have an amazing cognac at home that I think you would appreciate." This was a deviation from the protocol. The plan assumed that the first meeting would end with a simple exchange of numbers and an agreement to see each other in a day or two. But Olivia was accelerating events. Perhaps she felt something wrong, or was she rushing to finish her project earlier? Marcus showed no surprise. "With pleasure," he smiled, but his voice, transmitted through the microphone, sounded tense. "My hotel is at the other end of the city and I didn't take a car." "I have a car." She placed her palm on his hand, not looking away. "I can give you a ride." Danger signal. The cage was closing too quickly. I discreetly activated the alarm on Marcus's phone. 3 short vibrations, our code for retreat. He was supposed to find an excuse to leave, postpone the meeting for another day. But Marcus ignored the signal. "Great idea," he said, rising. "I'll pay for the drinks." From the observation point, I saw them exit the bar. Olivia led him not to her car, but in the opposite direction, down the street. Strange. I quickly packed the equipment and began moving along a parallel street, maintaining visual contact with them through the alleys. After 3 blocks, they approached a black SUV with tinted windows. Not Olivia's car. She took keys from her purse and opened the passenger door for Marcus. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, so imperceptibly that only a trained eye could catch it, then got into the car. The door slammed, and the SUV drove off. I followed the SUV at a safe distance, not turning on the headlights. My motorcycle, prepared for tracking, was quiet and maneuverable enough for urban conditions. The beacon on Marcus's boot was working properly, sending a signal to my phone every 30 seconds. They were moving not towards Olivia's house, but to the outskirts of the city. Expressway, then exit to a secondary road leading to wooded hills. I kept at a distance, relying more on the GPS signal than visual contact. Through Marcus's microphone came fragments of conversation, muffled by the noise of the engine. Olivia was telling about her country retreat, a place where she supposedly found inspiration for writing. Marcus maintained the conversation, but new notes appeared in his voice, unrecognizable to Olivia but obvious to me. He was alert. "We're almost there," said Olivia, when the SUV turned onto a dirt road leading deep into the forest. "Just a few minutes left." Suddenly Marcus's microphone began to have interference. The signal broke up, distorted. After 30 seconds, it completely disappeared. Jammer, someone had put an electronic shield around this territory. I increased speed, reducing the distance. To hell with concealment, now it was more important not to lose sight of them. But when I reached the turn onto the dirt road, the SUV was already out of sight. Only dust, slowly settling in the moonlight. The GPS signal from Marcus's boot was still coming in, but intermittently, with long delays. The last coordinates indicated a place 3 kilometers deep into the forest. I turned off the motorcycle and hid it in the bushes. Further, on foot. Moving silently among the trees, I checked my equipment. Gun with silencer in a shoulder holster, knife in the boot shaft, small tactical flashlight with a red light filter, not blinding in the dark. Infrared night vision goggles on my head, still raised. All like in the old days, only the target is different. After about a kilometer, the forest thinned, revealing a large clearing. In the center stood a country mansion, 2-story Victorian style with a wide veranda, 8 cars on the gravel area. Light in the windows of the first floor dimmed from the upper ones, nothing breaking through at all. The perfect place for what? A literary evening, a bloody ritual, or something I still didn't understand. I slipped closer, using trees as cover. About 50 meters from the house, I noticed the first guard, a large man in a dark suit standing at the corner of the house. Characteristic pose, hand under the jacket, definitely armed. The second guard patrolled the perimeter, moving in a circle every 6 minutes. Professional approach, almost military discipline. What kind of literary club has such security? I slowly circled the house along the perimeter, staying in the shadow of the trees. The backyard was equipped with landscape lighting, creating perfect spots of shadow between islands of light. In such conditions, even a novice could approach undetected. For me, it was almost too simple. Through infrared goggles, I distinguished another person on the second floor, a silhouette at the bedroom window. A motionless observer, possibly a sniper. Area of constant responsibility, the backyard and part of the forest. At this moment, 2 men in evening suits and masks came out of the house, Venetian, covering the upper half of the face. They lit cigarettes, talking quietly on the terrace. "The final presentation will begin in an hour," reached me. "They say it will be something extraordinary." "The last chapter is always the most dramatic," replied the second. "And considering the connection with the author, one can expect a masterpiece." They were talking about Marcus, about the fact that he was going to be killed as the final chapter of some perverted project. I had an hour to find him and get him out of here. Suddenly, Marcus's GPS beacon began transmitting a signal again, clear, stable. It showed that my friend was underground, in the basement of the house or some underground structure. I began looking for an entrance. The main doors of the house were guarded, the windows of the first floor probably equipped with alarms. But every building has weak points. Victorian mansions often have service entrances, ventilation shafts, inconspicuous entries for servants. Going around the house one more time, I discovered a small dormer window on the back side of the roof, partially hidden by overgrown ivy. The perfect point of infiltration. "Do you copy?" "Over." Marcus's voice in the earpiece was weak, breaking up but definitely his. "I copy," I whispered, pressing against the wall of the house. "Your status?" "Alive, but I'm in the basement. Judging by the surroundings, medical laboratory or operating room." "Weapons, constraints?" "Disarmed. Physically not constrained, but I see no way out. The door is locked from the outside." "Olivia?" "She left 10 minutes ago, said she would prepare the audience." "Ryan, there's something strange here. I thought this was a literary club, but it looks more like a cult. They have ceremonial clothes, some symbols on the walls." The connection broke again. I swore and continued moving toward the dormer window. The path lay through a covered veranda, then along scaffolding left after facade repairs, and finally, the final dash across the roof slope. I overcame the first 2 stages without problems, bypassing the guards' visible zones with mathematical precision. But when I was already on the roof, 6 meters from the window, an alarm went off. Not my fault. The alarm signal sounded from inside the house. Someone discovered another perimeter breach, or was this part of the plan? I pressed myself to the roof, transforming into an invisible shadow. The guards below began running around, talking on radios. But they all were drawing to the main entrance, not looking for an intruder on the roof. Using the moment, I approached the dormer window. Locked, but the old lock posed no difficulty. Within 15 seconds I was inside in a dusty, abandoned attic. In the attic floor, I discovered a hatch leading to the second floor. I listened. Silence. All the guards' attention apparently was focused on the first floor. Carefully opening the hatch, I made sure the corridor was empty and descended. The second floor presented an enfilade of rooms, decorated with pretentious luxury. Everywhere stained glass windows, heavy velvet drapes, paintings in gilded frames, and books, hundreds of books in glass cabinets. But looking closer, I realized these weren't ordinary editions. Each book was in a unique binding of leather in various shades. Some looked wrong, too similar to human skin. From behind the door at the end of the corridor came muffled voices. I carefully approached and listened. "Guests have already gathered in the main hall. The ceremony begins in 20 minutes, a female voice, not Olivia's. "And is our star ready?" Male, low with a slight hoarseness. "More than ready. She spent an hour in meditative preparation. Says this chapter will be her masterpiece. Our patron will be pleased. He's been waiting for this moment for many years." They were talking about my wife and some patron, probably pen master, the mysterious curator who directed the entire project. I moved further, looking for a way down to the basement where Marcus was being held. At the end of the corridor, I discovered a small service staircase. Perfect. Descending to the first floor, I found myself in a small room, probably serving as a pantry for the servants. From here came the muffled hum of many voices. It seemed the main action was happening somewhere nearby. A half-open door led to a corridor going deep into the house. There was noticeably more activity there, people in masks and evening attire passing by, heading to the main hall. I needed another way, and it was found almost immediately, an inconspicuous door on the right leading to another staircase now downward. Basement. The door was locked, but the lock yielded to a lockpick in 40 seconds. I began to descend, carefully stepping on the old wooden steps. The staircase turned, revealing a long underground corridor with several doors. Lighting dim but visible traces of recent repairs, new wiring, modern lamps contrasting with the ancient walls. At the end of the corridor was a massive door. The lock clicked, the door slowly opened, revealing a room transformed into something between an operating room and a theater stage. In the center stood a medical bed, next to it, stands with equipment for monitoring vital signs. Around the perimeter of the room, several rows of chairs arranged in an amphitheater. Perfectly white walls, surgical light directed at the bed, everything was prepared for some kind of performance. Marcus stood at the far wall, holding a young woman in a white coat. On the floor lay two men, clearly unconscious. "I knew you'd find a way to find me," he smiled upon seeing me. "We need to get out of here, this place. It's worse than we thought, much worse." "You'll explain on the way." I examined the woman doctor. "Can she raise an alarm?" "Not for at least an hour." Marcus nodded to an injection ampule on a tray. "I used her own sedatives. With the dosage, as you understand, I didn't skimp." We laid the woman on the floor and headed for the exit. But at that moment, the door to the operating room swung open, and Olivia appeared on the threshold. She was dressed differently than in the bar. Now she wore a long red dress resembling an evening gown, hair loose, flowing over her shoulders. In her hand, a strange metal object resembling an antique surgical instrument. "Ryan, my dear husband," she didn't look surprised. "I knew you would come. It was only a matter of time." Her voice sounded softly, almost tenderly, like when she said she loved me, but the expression in her eyes was alien, detached, as if I was looking at a perfect mask of my wife, behind which hid something completely different. Time shifted into slow-motion mode. I raised my gun, pointing it at Olivia. She didn't move from her spot, only slightly tilted her head, studying me with the curiosity of a preparator examining an interesting specimen. "You won't shoot," she said calmly. "If you wanted to kill me, you would have done it at home in my sleep. You need answers, and I'll give them to you." Her confidence was so absolute that, for a moment, I felt like a puppet in someone else's play. As if all this was part of a script she had written long before I discovered the diary in the mailbox. "Where are the other guards?" I asked, not lowering the weapon. "Why are you alone?" "Because this is my moment," she took a step forward. "My final chapter. No one should interfere in the creative process." Behind her back appeared two figures in masks and dark suits. One remained at the door, the second slipped inside the room, holding a gun with a silencer. "Except, of course, my editors," Olivia smiled, not turning to those who entered. "They always monitor the purity of the experiment." "On the floor, both of you," commanded the man with the gun. I didn't move. Marcus also remained standing, slightly shifting to the side so as not to be in line with me. A basic combat maneuver, increasing the target area for the enemy and complicating aiming. "You didn't hear him," Olivia feigned surprise. "Strange. Usually people react to the threat of a weapon." "We are not usual people," I replied. "That's exactly why you're here." She came even closer, ignoring my gun. "Ordinary people write ordinary stories. Extraordinary literature requires extraordinary characters." Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Marcus preparing for a jump. His posture seemed relaxed, but I knew this characteristic change in the center of gravity, a combat stance disguised as normal. I slightly lowered my hand with the gun, drawing attention to myself. "You're sick, Olivia," I said, trying to speak evenly and calmly as if to a patient in acute psychosis. "You need help. All this," I gestured around the operating room, "is not real. It's a fantasy generated by a sick mind." "Oh, this is the most real thing I've ever done," she laughed, a terrifying, empty laugh. "You know what the problem is with most writers. They describe what they've never experienced. Their suffering is imaginary, their delight's theoretical. I write in blood, literally." At that moment, Marcus attacked. In one smooth movement, he lunged at the man with the gun, evading the line of fire and simultaneously knocking the weapon from his hand. I dove right, rolled, and shot the guard standing in the doorway. The silencer worked perfectly, only a dull thud and the sound of a falling body. Olivia didn't even flinch, as if expecting this. She simply stepped back, watching as Marcus broke the first guard's arm, then finished him with a blow to the temple. "Magnificent," she whispered with some perverted admiration. "Such elegant choreography of violence. A shame to waste it on these worthless extras." I pointed the gun at her face. "Where's the exit?" "Everywhere and nowhere," she shrugged. "You understand that the house is surrounded, that as soon as you leave this room, you'll be destroyed. The question isn't whether you can leave, but whether you want to know the truth before death." "What truth?" "About who organized all this, who stands behind the literary experimenters, who chose both of you for the final chapter." At this moment, from the corridor came sounds of struggle and a single shot. Someone was approaching the operating room. "No time," Marcus grabbed me by the shoulder. "We need to leave." "Another exit," I turned to Olivia. "Where? A place like this always has a backup exit." "Behind the instrument shelf," she pointed to the far wall. "A secret door leads to a tunnel that ends in the forest 100 meters from the house. But you won't make it. He's already coming." "Who?" "Pen Master." Her eyes feverishly gleamed. Marcus ran to the indicated shelf and began looking for the mechanism opening the secret door. I kept Olivia at gunpoint, simultaneously watching the entrance to the operating room. Footsteps in the corridor were getting closer. Slow, heavy footsteps of a person in no hurry because he knows his victim is trapped. "Found it!" exclaimed Marcus, moving the shelf and revealing a low, dark passage. "Quickly." I began to retreat toward the secret door, not letting Olivia out of my sight. She made no attempt to run or attack, just stood, smiling like a satisfied author observing the development of his own plot. "You're coming with us," I grabbed her by the arm, "as a guarantee of safe exit." "I don't think so," she shook her head, looking me straight in the eyes. "My place is here, with him." At that moment, the door to the operating room slowly opened. On the threshold stood a man in a military surgeon's mask, metal, covering the entire face. Tall, broad-shouldered in a dark garment resembling a surgical suit, but with elements of military uniform. In one hand he held a scalpel, in the other, a gun. "We knew you would come, Ryan," he said, and from this voice the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. A voice I hadn't heard in 4 years but would recognize out of thousands. "Major Stevens," I exhaled, lowering the gun from shock. The man in the mask slowly raised his hands and removed his metal face, revealing the real one, disfigured by burns, with the left part missing, replaced by some metal prosthetics. Right eye alive, left, a cybernetic implant glowing with a dim red light. "No longer Major," he corrected. "Now I am Pen Master. Sounds pretentious, I know, but in literary circles they value such theatricality." Olivia approached him and stood beside him, looking at me with a triumphant smile. "You were the best sniper in the unit, Ryan," continued Stevens. "Always finished the job. That's exactly why I chose your wife for this project." Marcus silently approached me and now stood to my right, ready for action. But I knew we were both paralyzed by shock from this revelation. Stevens should have been dead. He died in an explosion in Afghanistan. That's what we were told. The body wasn't found, but no one could survive such a fiery massacre. Or could they? Our bodies are maimed by war, Stevens gestured around, as if presenting an invisible audience. But in the world of literature, we can create a new reality. This book is our revenge on the world that forgot us. From behind his back emerged four more men. I recognized them all: Breaker, Zimmerman, Halls, Garcia. Members of my former squad, considered dead in the same operation as Stevens. How? I began, but Olivia interrupted. You never told me the truth about your service, Ryan. Her voice held reproach, almost offense. But they told me. Do you know how many civilians died because of your erroneous shots? That's a lie, I breathed. Indeed, a lie, confirmed Stevens, stroking the scars on his face. But a very convincing one. Convincing enough to make a sensitive writer with wounded self-esteem become an instrument of revenge. You had to suffer. Just as we suffered. Stevens ran his finger over his mutilated face. Operation Hourglass was betrayed. Someone leaked information to the enemy. Someone who knew our exact position. I didn't. Oh, I know it wasn't you, Stevens laughed. I know exactly who did it, he nodded at Marcus. Our valiant military journalist, specialist in exposés, a man who sold his comrades for sensational material. Marcus paled. This is absurd, I never. A transmitter was found in your backpack, said Garcia, stepping forward. After you supposedly survived the explosion, accidentally found yourself outside the perimeter during the attack, right? It was an accident, shouted Marcus. I stepped away to replace the batteries in the radio. I didn't betray anyone. Now it doesn't matter anymore. Stevens waved the scalpel. What's important is that the final chapter of our book will be written today, with the main heroes as both authors and characters simultaneously. At that moment, a shot rang out, but not from my weapon and not from Stevens' gun. The bullet hit the medical equipment next to the bed. Sparks from the short circuit distracted everyone. I instantly rolled behind a metal cabinet, pulling Marcus with me. Cover from the rear provided, Captain, came a familiar voice from the secret door. In the doorway stood Jackson, another member of our squad, with a rifle in his hands. Jackson, I couldn't believe my eyes. But you. Explanations later. He kept Stevens and the others at gunpoint. These bastards perverted our brotherhood. Instead of protecting the innocent, they turned into monsters. Traitor, hissed Stevens. You were supposed to be with us. We trusted you. I was with you, replied Jackson. For years I infiltrated your organization, gathering evidence, and now it's all over. The literary club is closed. Time seemed to freeze. Stevens, Olivia, and 4 dead soldiers on one side, the 3 of us on the other. The tension reached the boiling point. Olivia was the first to break the equilibrium. She grabbed the scalpel that had fallen from Stevens' hand and rushed at us, aiming for Marcus's throat. The last chapter must be completed. She screamed with a fury that transformed her face into a mask of madness. I intercepted her hand a centimeter from Marcus's neck, twisted her wrist, tore away the scalpel. Olivia writhed in my arms, hissing and spitting like a wild cat. At the same second, a firefight began. Jackson opened fire on Stevens and his men. Marcus grabbed the gun from one of the fallen guards and joined the battle. I held Olivia, trying simultaneously to drag her to the secret door. She resisted with inhuman strength. You loved me, she hissed, looking into my eyes. Admit it. You loved me even when you found out who I really am. I didn't answer. Some questions don't have worthy answers. Ryan, grenade, shouted Jackson, and I saw how Stevens pulled the pin from a small cylinder. Everything happened simultaneously. I pushed Olivia aside, jumped behind the steel cabinet. Marcus dove into the secret passage. Jackson fired his last volley from the rifle. The grenade exploded, but this wasn't an ordinary fragmentation grenade. It was a thermobaric mini-bomb, a weapon forbidden by all conventions on warfare. The air in the room instantly heated to metal-melting temperature. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness, Olivia, standing in the center of the firestorm with arms outstretched, as if accepting the fire as a blessing. Her hair flashed like a halo, the dress turned into tongues of flame, but she continued to stand, looking directly at me through the veil of flames. Her lips moved, pronouncing words I couldn't hear because of the roar of fire, but I knew what she was saying. The same words that ended the last chapter of the diary found in my mailbox. When fire consumes everything around, only pure truth remains. And the truth is that love and death are the only real things in this world of lies. Chapter 4: Eternal Repentance. The world didn't return to me at once. First, there was only ringing in my ears and a coppery taste in my mouth. Then, sharp pain in my right shoulder and the smell of burnt plastic. How much time had passed? Seconds. Minutes. I lay, half-stunned, in an unnatural position behind an overturned metal cabinet that took the main force of the explosion. Consciousness returned along with the understanding that the grenade thrown by Stevens wasn't the kind that could work here. Or perhaps, someone switched it to minimum power. Too little destruction for a thermobaric bomb. There was no coincidence in this, only calculation. A reddish fog still floated in the air when I tried to focus my gaze. A shot sounded in the smoke, dry, professional, with the characteristic click of the bolt of a high-precision rifle. Then another, and another. Someone was methodically clearing the room. I carefully moved to the side, peering into the clouds of smoke. The metallic echo of shots rang in my ears, bouncing off the basement walls. "Breaker, right flank 20 degrees 3 meters," pronounced a quiet, calm voice. Garcia behind the overturned bed, wounded but active. I immediately recognized this voice and manner of giving target designations. Jackson. Sergeant Caleb Jackson, the best machine gunner of our squad, considered dead along with Stevens and the others. "Cover from the rear provided, Captain." Jackson's voice became louder, addressing me directly. "You can get up, perimeter under control." I carefully straightened up, keeping the gun ready. In the smoke, the figure of Jackson was vaguely visible. He stood at the breach in the wall, holding a high-precision M40A5 rifle with a thermal imager. Classic weapon of a U.S. Marine Corps sniper. My weapon. "Are you all right?" he asked, not taking his eyes from the scope. Another shot. Another target neutralized. "Check Marcus, he's in the passage to your right." I quickly found Marcus, pinned down by the debris of the door but alive, with a gashed eyebrow and traces of burns on his left arm. Helped him get out, not forgetting to keep in sight the space around us. "These bastards perverted our brotherhood," pronounced Jackson, lowering the rifle and coming closer. "For years I gathered evidence, infiltrating their group. Thought I could stop them by legal methods." "You, all this time were working undercover." Marcus's voice sounded incredulous. "NSA, Section Z19, Jackson replied dryly. "After the explosion, locals found us. Stevens was in critical condition, the others not much better. NSA extracted us through their channels, closed information about survivors. Wanted to use Stevens because of his knowledge of local groups. But he changed. Started creating what became the literary club." "And you?" I asked, carefully studying the face of my former comrade. "Officially died. Unofficially became a ghost tracking other ghosts." He nodded toward one of the bodies. "Always knew they would come for you, Ryan. You were the only surviving officer of Operation Hourglass. The only one who could reveal the truth." We didn't have time to exchange further explanations. The door at the far end of the operating room crashed open. Stevens, limping due to a bullet wound in his leg, was trying to escape. I instantly raised my gun and fired, hitting him in the right knee. He collapsed with a muffled groan, continuing to crawl toward the exit. "The bastard is still alive," hissed Marcus, picking up a weapon from the floor of one of the fallen guards. We moved forward, making our way through the chaos. The smoke began to dissipate, revealing a picture of destruction. Overturned medical stands, broken monitors, bodies of guards sprawled in unnatural poses. The remaining survivors from Stevens' squad, Breaker and Halls, used debris of medical equipment as cover, alternately opening fire to restrain our advance. Familiar tactics, crossfire, not allowing the enemy to leave the kill zone. Jackson, left flank, I commanded, as if years hadn't passed since our last joint operation. Marcus, with me, right trajectory. Marcus and I moved to bypass the main firing zone, using close combat skills honed in countless urban conflicts. Jackson provided sniper cover, consistently reducing the enemy's radius of action. "Stop shooting," unexpectedly thundered Stevens' voice. "We have a hostage." He dragged Olivia from behind an overturned gurney, disheveled, with blood on her face but still alive. She didn't resist, didn't scream. Just looked at me with a kind of detached smile, as if watching an interesting theatrical performance. "One more step, and I'll finish what I started." Stevens pressed a surgical scalpel to Olivia's throat. "Although it doesn't matter anymore. The final chapter is complete, Ryan. I won." I didn't need to look at Olivia to understand. She wasn't afraid of the scalpel at her throat. I saw it in her eyes. She was part of the plan, perhaps even a more important part than Stevens himself. "Release my wife." My voice sounded even without emotions. I took a step forward, pointing the gun exactly between his eyes. "One more step, and I'll finish the last chapter with her blood." The hand with the scalpel noticeably trembled, but Olivia's eyes remained calm. Why isn't she afraid? "You know what's most ironic?" I continued to slowly approach. "Your book is a complete lie. Stevens used you." I didn't take my gaze from Olivia, addressing only her, ignoring Stevens and his threats. "I never shot at civilians, Olivia. It was Stevens who gave the order for an artillery strike on the village of Al-Qadira. And then, when it came time to answer, blamed the snipers." Her eyes widened, pupils constricted. The first sincere emotion I had seen throughout this nightmare. "But," he showed me the materials of the service investigation. Her voice trembled. "Photos, video evidence. I myself read testimonies of survivors." "Forgery," I cut off. "Basic manipulation technique. He used your writing talent, your resentment after rejection by literary critics, your thirst for recognition. He made you into an instrument." "Don't listen to him," hissed Stevens. "He's trying to save his skin." But doubt had already crept into her consciousness. I saw it in the minutest details of facial expressions, in micro-expressions that even the most skillful liar cannot control. Subtle tension in the corners of the eyes, slight asymmetry in the position of the lips, almost imperceptible dilation of the nostrils. "If I only wanted to save myself," I continued, taking another step, "I would have shot you in your sleep the very first night after I learned the truth. But I wanted to understand, wanted to know if the real Olivia was buried somewhere under this mask." Marcus, understanding my strategy, imperceptibly shifted to the side, coming around behind Stevens. Jackson held the rifle ready but didn't shoot, too dangerous, considering the proximity of the hostage. Suddenly Marcus sharply jerked his head, pretending to notice something behind Stevens' back. This simple trick worked. Stevens was distracted for a fraction of a second. This was enough for Olivia to abruptly jerk and knock the scalpel out of his hand. I lunged forward in a jump, slamming Stevens into the wall. Olivia recoiled to the side, rubbing an abrasion on her neck. "You're a liar," hissed Stevens in my face. "Always have been. You abandoned us there in Al-Qadira, left us to die when you could have saved us. I pulled 4 people out from under fire while you were hiding behind fortifications." My voice remained icy. "They didn't find you because you ran first, abandoning your men." I pressed the gun to his temple. "Do you know what happens to war criminals?" "It doesn't matter." suddenly said Jackson, putting away the rifle. He took out a special communications phone and dialed a combination of numbers. Objects neutralized. Proceed to the symmetry phase. I recognized the acronym of the secret project. Symmetry, an experimental NSA program using neurotechnology for interrogating especially dangerous criminals. Officially closed 5 years ago as inhumane. Unofficially. Seems it continued to exist. Marcus looked questioningly at me, but I merely shook my head. Some knowledge is better not to have. 20 minutes later, which we spent holding Stevens and neutralizing the remaining members of his group who were still alive, a team of people in white coats entered the basement. They moved with mechanical precision, laying out equipment, preparing some devices resembling medical scanners. Stevens, seeing them, suddenly changed expression. For the first time, I saw in his eyes real animal fear. "No," he howled, trying to break free from our hands. "Not this, better kill me." I held him while the doctors administered a sedative. Turned to Olivia, who was observing the proceedings with a detached expression. "Now they will become test subjects," I nodded toward Stevens and the others. "Each murder you committed will be reproduced in their consciousness, but they will be the victims, eternally, in a loop without the possibility of escape." "And me," she whispered, for the first time looking truly frightened. "What will happen to me?" I looked at Jackson. He barely noticeably nodded. "You'll get your literary fame, Olivia." I allowed myself a cold smile. "Your Symphony of Solitude will become the most studied work in the history of neurophysiology. Every word, every emotion, every murder will be analyzed at the molecular level. You will become a work of art." People in white coats began packing the equipment. One of them approached Olivia with an injection system. She didn't resist, only looked at me with an unreadable expression. "Did you love me?" she asked when the needle touched her neck. "Really?" I didn't answer. Some questions don't have worthy answers. 3 years later. Secret military laboratory somewhere in the Nevada desert. I passed through 6 levels of security before reaching the central research section. I'm greeted by Dr. Shepard, a world-renowned neurophysiologist, officially killed in a terrorist attack 7 years ago. "She's in stable condition," says Shepard, leading me along a sterile corridor to a glass chamber in the center. "Brain activity is phenomenal, never seen anything like it." In the chamber, separated from us by soundproof glass, sits Olivia, a motionless figure in a white hospital gown. Her body is entangled with dozens of sensors connected to various parts of the brain. Eyes open, but empty, as if looking into another dimension. Subject is experiencing murder scenario 43. Dr. Shepard makes notes on a tablet. Self-reflection loop initiated. What does that mean? It means that now she's experiencing every death from the victim's perspective, then from the killer's perspective, then again the victim's, and so on to infinity. Every murder she committed or described is being played out in her consciousness with absolute neurophysiological accuracy. I silently look at my wife through the glass. Her face contorts from invisible pain, mouth opens in a soundless scream. Not a drop of compassion arises in me, only cold satisfaction from a perfectly functioning mechanism of retribution. "Now you really feel every word you wrote," I whisper, though I know she can't hear me. Dr. Shepard escorts me to the exit. At the doors, she hands me a folder with a report. "Your interview for the archive is ready, Captain Connor. Sign here." I look through the last pages. My own words, spoken just an hour ago, have already been transformed into an official document. The most accurate sniper shot I ever made was when I destroyed her soul, while preserving her body for eternal repentance. I sign the report and walk out into the blinding light of the desert, leaving behind the darkness of military secrets and personal revenge. In this bright world, there are no longer Ryan or Olivia Connor. There are only shadows of ghosts from Operation Hourglass. forever frozen in a time loop where love and death are entwined in a single vicious dance. The most terrible weapon is not that which kills the body, but that which makes the soul eternally die, never reaching the peace of death. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.